Hi. So we have four esteemed panelists today with us. So these people are going to delayer or demystify rather how agentic AI is, conquering the world. Look around you, right? So you see AI everywhere. Every booth, every panel talks about AI, autonomous networks, vehicles, and whatnot. But these four gentlemen, obviously, along with Nawasha is going to help us talk each of them layer by layer. And I think we are into an exciting conversation. So on behalf of Wipro, welcome all of you. And we love to be having you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So maybe I will start with you, Guy. So how do you think this problem statement evolving in agentic AI? I mean, you talk about data, you talk about trust, you talk about agent economy, right? What are those challenges that enterprises are often overlooking today? Can you please summarize for us?
Yep. Yeah. Sure. Thank you, Swami. Look, for those of you who I'll frame the requirements I'm about to share with you. But in these three missions, we address different aspects of the market, from composable IT, autonomous network, and AI and data, which I head. Within the AI and data mission, we engage with a lot of members who are on their journey to achieve an outcome, be it an outcome of autonomy in operations or network or customer, etc. And the problems we're focusing on and what we're actually getting from these members is really interesting. They're all stuck with very basic foundational issues. Those foundational issues are somewhat are the basics and that they need to do. The first one is data. It always starts with the data. They are not only trying to get the data ready, they have challenges in actually with data projects. Every agents they want to build is another project, it's another setup, and they need something to move into the concept of data products. They are trying to get agents to find data. They're trying to have the capability to talk to their data, for lack of a better word. They don't want to
Yeah.
do that. And then they also that's in the data space. They need to ingest large amounts of data. They want to share data. So that's one very big aspect. The second aspect on their journey to just enable AI is the interactions between the agents. And that's something we can talk about later a little bit, but the interactions between the agents is not just protocol. There are different aspects of doing that in telecommunication. It's not just enterprise IT. You've got talk between network and IT and so forth, and that's complex. And the third one, which was probably the most important one, is that they have issues and challenges to get models working. It's very easy to have an API with a debit card going out to a model, but what happens when you have to scale it and you have multi-models, SLMs, LLMs, and billions of tokens every day running under your business? I just told you three problems of technology that our members are telling us, but there's a fourth one which is really important: the people.
Yeah, absolutely.
There is an absolute talent challenge there, and not just talent, there's a disruption of the entire fabric of HR. Agents are doing people's work. Do you give somebody a promotion for an agent's work? I'll leave it with that.
Thank you very much. I think that's a great opening, Guy. Maybe I will come to you, Nevash, right? So you see that AI is, I was reading it somewhere, AI is basically decades of technology compressed into weeks or months, right? As while what would have taken maybe decades to realize might be there within weeks or months for you in production. But our enterprises there not yet, right? A lot of them are still stuck with the pilot purgatory challenges and things and so on. So what are those single biggest data gaps that you see that kills AI, or maybe that could be a biggest bottleneck for AI to go forward?
Look, I've worked in a telecom for 20 years, and I have been out of a telecom probably for about close to 6 years in software. And I think there are leaders and there are laggards. Not everyone's in exactly the same place today. So I think for the leaders, typically what they are doing is they're recognizing that we are talking about companies that are quite often more than 100 years old. They have a lot of legacy data. They have a lot of new applications. And to solve any single problem requires someone to traverse across 4 to 8 of them. So the leaders that we are working with, what they are starting to do is to unify their data or have visibility at the metadata level on the network and the customer data. Because when you bring those data sets together in a unified way, you can then be far more predictive and proactive. And, we call it our lake house. And once you're there, it's all multi-cloud, totally open format. You then have the ability to build your AI applications and your agents. And so to me, the way we see the winners doing it or the leaders doing it, and they are achieving things like, a 40% reduction in churn. They are achieving, a dollar increase in ARPU. These are things that their own businesses have not seen probably in a good 10 years. So the ones that are doing it well, they are working once the data is unified. They are using, multi-agent model. Sometimes I give you an example. I call a telecom or I turn up at a store and I want to move house and I need some help to relocate me from point A to point B. They will be able to serve me, but at the same time, there's an agent telling them that I'm not entirely satisfied with their service because I haven't been for 2 years. There is another agent telling them, well, actually, I have 2 children and a husband, and we all have different wireless plans. And there is an opportunity to give us a bundle with, our fixed service and our wireless service, and also give us probably a more optimal offer. Or maybe they recognize there's some insights to say we are in a weather zone that often results in outages, so to sell a backup service. So the telecoms who are doing it really well are using those multi-agents to retrieve all the data. And because your data is together, the latency is really low. And that's what's creating the big difference. So I think, there are also many laggards. It's a very large industry. Everyone's at a different point. I'm probably working with about, I'd say, 150 telecoms around the world. But I think there is now a more deliberate motion. Everyone started addressing the AI, but the data is probably the bigger issue for most. And I think when you, start to get to processing the data at speed, eliminating the multiple versions of data, some accurate, some inaccurate, then you have the AI work far more optimally.
I like your CEO says that, 80% of the databases, I think the Neon example he was quoting, are built by agents. So that's, so the question he was throwing was agents are ready, is your data ready?
Yeah,
Right.
totally. So we have Lakebase, which, is also really important because what we are seeing, and Lakebase is a serverless Postgres database. And what we are seeing is that most of the applications are actually delivered by agents and created by agents. Software development has actually changed a lot in most organizations. You can do it far more swiftly. You can do it in a very agile way. And when you're integrating your, transaction database with your lakehouse that has all your data, you're actually working hand in glove. And the result is much lower latency also in achieving an outcome.
Yep, absolutely. Great insights there. So Adam, if I come to you, you are at the intersection of all of these. You come from the platform world, right? You have seen all it all. So in your perspective, what role does platform play? Are they basically enablers in this real sense, or could they be a roadblock somewhere?
Being a platform that we are, we sit across the entire enterprise, and that puts us in a very different position, a different perspective on it. And in my experience and all the clients I'm working with, I kind of see 3 fundamental requirements, if you like, to get these technologies working. The first one is the data, right? And a lot of these telecom companies, acquisition has been rife. And so when you start looking at the data problem, it's probably more complex in telecom and financial services than any other industry. And I would say telecom is the most complex. So that's why you're so busy. But the goal is to get that data into a brilliant environment like yours. And we work very closely together as technologies, because when you're working as a platform as we do, and we're looking at the end-to-end process, not just an agent performing a task in the process, but actually running the whole process and calling all the different agents, that agentic brain, as I call it, needs high quality, high fidelity information. When language models for LLMs first came out, we always used to talk about hallucinations, and an hallucination is where an LLM doesn't know the answer, so it makes it up.
Yeah.
Right? And the same is true in agentic workflows. If the data and the signal is wrong, the answer is going to be wrong. And it's very difficult to make up for very poor data. So that's the first tenet. The second one is that process. And to understand that an agent performs a task, but there's then different levels of agentic workflow. A simple workflow, like you walk into the store and you need a new, etc., is a very simple one. When I think about corporate client onboarding for a telco. Imagine you're a large telco and you win a new corporate client and you're going to onboard them globally with 100,000 employees and all of their services and all of their networks. That's a super complicated process. And we're in a privileged position that we can run those entire end-to-end processes through their life cycle with our platform, our AI orchestrator. And then the third part that I think is possibly as important as data, maybe slightly more, it's neck and neck, is the whole governance. And it's not IT traditional governance. It's not the promote to production and is this ready to go? It's the whole, where's the human in the loop? How have we decided that? How are we encouraging employees without hurting themselves or us? How do we think about EU AI Act and all of those things? And I think those three things are the key things to get right. Get those right, governance in place, clean and high quality data, and understand your processes and know where you're bringing the humans in. Those are the people who are flying. Those are the leaders. Those who are kind of toying and playing are the ones who are flailing and failing because they haven't thought about the whole planning of this. They're just experimenting in the labs and they haven't actually got there. So it's a big, big shift, I think.
I mean, we definitely would like to double click on the governance part there in the second round. But coming to you, Amit, from Wipro Consulting, right? We do talk to a lot of CXOs and CIOs of the world. So how are these conversations changing? What is there in the agenda that you haven't seen 6 months before? I mean, are they ready to embrace agentic transformation in the real sense?
See, first of all, I think 3 people are doing a fantastic job of doing a great marketing around it. So that means when I talk to the CDOs and the CIOs, they see that there is readiness out there. There is platform readiness, all the technical aspects and are there. But coming back to the data point, there is a tech company, large tech company. They have Jira, they have GitHub and all of it. But when I open the instance, I see no data. It fundamentally starts with people actually creating the knowledge base.
Yep.
And without that knowledge base, there is no chance AI can work. So the stage where companies are, and I'm talking even about some of the telco companies, it took about 2 years to bring the data discipline. And you start doing SDLC observability, you start realizing they don't even use for their entire SDLC process. So with the IT topic that you speak about, even for the SDLC process, we could figure out there is about 30 to 40% of rework, which can be avoided if they start having the data right in the first instance and even do the observability. So there is a basic challenge. One is on the adoption side. And second is, with prompt engineering, let's say, we are trying to change how people do, say, search, AI search on top. And essentially that should hopefully make use of our logical thinking and how do we break down the problem right first time in the prompt. But when I talk to the business guys, sales and marketing team, supply chain, all the functions who are the business users of these IT systems, for example, they're far away from doing that and working with IT on that. So that's the other change aspect. The third one is, people using AI for themselves and getting better at it. And that itself is it's a process you need to go through to get better and better how to use and work with an AI agent before you start talking about agentic.
Yeah.
And that's the third aspect. There have been a lot of aha moments. There is no doubt about that in the agent world, where people realized, oh, I was thinking that my job is creative. but there are so many tedious and repetitive elements of it, which now I see how AI is going to help me with. So those things have been there, but this is not a widespread phenomenon yet. And I think, of course, as you said, there have been a lot of POCs and experiments and all. But at least what I see is next 2 to 5 years, the conversations with CDOs are where they want to do commercial deals, keeping in mind that there is a lot of change which has to happen. It's not a 1 year or a 2 year. The first year is the readiness. The second year is where we start seeing some bit of adoption happening. Other aspect is the cultural aspect. When you go to, say in Germany or very labor-intensive countries in India, there is a different adoption rate that you entirely see. So I think the change aspect is often underrated, but that is going to be key. That's where Wipro steps in, and when we bring all these technologies together, create those customer experiences, employee experiences, having those humans in loop and out of loop that you spoke about, especially having those agents in the moments that matter, and having the human doing the continuous verification and monitoring. These are some of the things which have become now best practice, a good learning. But I think change management is one of the key things in adoption in the next few years.
Absolutely. I think, yeah.
I just want to add something that is kind of food for thought as we go through this journey. Okay, and then that's from an industry perspective. We're not going to move from 0 to 100. No one's going to take it. Okay? And we sometimes find ourselves all talking about 0 to 100. But the actual reality, there are still data solutions, governance solutions, service solutions, process solutions, people solutions. And I think the role of the people is really important. I'm not sure whether we're going to see formations of sub-practices within businesses where they come together to build a network domain. Building a network domain requires the use of data and a data platform that is capable, governance platform, integration and people, but they'll have to specialize in it for at least a couple of years before they can automate themselves out of a job. And we forget to talk about that middle phase of those sub-practices. I wish I had the answer or the crystal ball gazing who's going to own those practices, but this is an interesting thing that we sometimes find not talking about.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we are trying to demystify, right? So if I come to you, Nevash, right? If we just double click on that particular point, see, telcos sits on billions of data, right? They have huge number of events that they process, CDR and all those things. Are they poor in strategizing data today? So the question is more on how do they use this proprietary data? Is it a competitive moat for them, or they are not yet there in terms of strategizing this data as an asset? You know where I'm coming from. So what is Databricks, thinking about this?
So typically what we see is when you meet with many C-level executives who understand that data is a blocker for them at the moment, what they would normally say is that we understand this industry really well. We understand the challenges we face, and we have a strategy to overcome these challenges. And they're working with many organizations like yourselves and some of the large consulting firms to give them advice on how to address the issues. The challenge they face is in executing those strategies, it comes back to the data. I mean, how do you really reduce your churn without having a lot of your data very clear and AI agents act? Because we are talking about industries that also have, average telco probably has 60 million subscribers. So if the question is, what are they doing? It varies. I still think there's a lot of confusion. I don't think everyone's quite out there, but I think even looking at this event, what we see very clearly is there are some telecoms that are growing at the subscriber level and the ARPU level. And when you go deep into why they are growing, it's typically because they are using the data and the AI far more effectively. There are many who are provisioning new services much faster. So they significantly enhance the whole book to bill or order to cash process, and they are doing much better. Like the example that you just shared, if you're doing it with a sound data and AI strategy, and when I worked in telco, you won 10,000 services with a new company. You had two choices. You either spend the next year trying to deliver those, in which case it impacted your EBITDA and your revenue, or now you can actually get many of those orders simultaneously working through and have it all provisioned in, a very short time frame. But I think at the moment, the awareness is there. And I just say, many telecoms ask us, so how do we get started? Where do we start? Where do we go first? And I always say, look at the outcomes you are trying to achieve most. Yeah. For some of our customers, it's fraud because this industry is impacted to the tune of $40 billion a year in fraud. So some want to start with, how do I minimize subscription fraud and SIM swap fraud? Because if you can resolve that issue, your customers trust you much more. Some of them say, I want to start with actually growing my revenue. So knowing the outcome actually provides a much clearer strategy, even with your data, because then you track it back to the 16 data sources. You work on a unification strategy, opening it up to the right format, so you can now easily work with the accurate data. So they're typically the things that I think are starting to change. But is this industry one that still has opportunity? Totally.
And I think I'll just add one point, Nevash. So when we talk about verifiable or a verified metadata, there is another aspect. If you break the data down into structured and unstructured is untapped, and that's where AI has the biggest value.
At the moment, we are seeing the value is mostly in the unstructured data.
Yeah.
If we look at the data we're processing, yesterday I was on a different panel where we were talking about the edge. And the reality is, if you have a video camera, an IoT sensor watching the production line and there's an anomaly, you can't really wait for that camera to be talking to multiple handoff points to figure out what to do. You want to act at that moment and stop or pause that production line or get a human in the loop exactly at that moment. And, the insights that you're getting, look at the calls. That is a really good point. And the last thing I'd comment on is people transformation. Because this is something if you look at the average telecom, they have more than 10,000, in some cases 100,000 employees. And this is the reason this is slowing down in some areas, going faster in others, is because we've got to take people on that same journey. Everyone's skills need to be evolved and uplifted. The organizations that do it really well are also focusing on that cultural transformation, because I think that's probably the fourth area or maybe the first, that is critical for this evolution.
Do you know, it was interesting as you were talking about that, and as we come back round, I was just thinking about some of the clients and the multiple speeds they're moving at, because that horizon 3 of this, agentified environment and autonomous processes across the whole business, that's a long way off, right? But getting those foundational rocks in place, taking the time to get the data and think about that as a kind of agile process on that journey, and then delivering in the interim. I've got lots of clients who have live agents in production and agentic workflows in production. Are they doing the whole end-to-end? Not yet, but they're learning a lot. And the people journey is happening as they're experimenting and running it in production. And the other nice one is, if you get that right, so you've got your strategy, you've got your vision, you know what the answers you want to solve, and you're putting the horizon 1, 2, 3 in place, and you're actually releasing funding for the next round of investments as well. And you're learning, well, actually, I can give an agent a $25 decision and I'll just keep an eye on that. And maybe 6 months later, you go, no, you know what? I'll give you a $50 sign off. Okay. And I see that happening, but that trust is coming through, because we have to trust the technology, which comes back to the other governance. We have to look at the technology as well, right?
Confidence or trust?
I think that's a really good philosophical point. They're interrelated, aren't they?
Yeah.
Well, we'll come to that.
And one of the points I want to make also is, Adam, and then to the people transformation and the change, right? So AI essentially needs a scaffolding of the code around it. Yeah?
Yes.
So it cannot work in isolation, it's clear.
Yes.
And when it comes to platforms, you are that scaffolding which holds it all together with hallucinations, AI governance, explainability and all those aspects, yeah? And when we talk about change, there is a dichotomy they need to deal with. Shall I do it, hollow the core, and shall I do it entirely new? And how are you dealing with this dichotomy? Because to my mind, if I'm comfortable with a certain tool, AI is an infusion, and I can do a better job basically. And that's how change becomes easier versus doing it entirely in a new way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. On that particular point, right? It's like you are talking about agents, we are talking about multi-agent ecosystem and things like that. But obviously, autonomous decisions without trust is a catastrophe in waiting, right? So, would you like to talk a bit more about how do you control this governance part around that? Because I would like to really come into the governance part soon. So, how do you control the autonomous decisions making and the trust part of?
Right. Okay. So the governance is an enormous topic, okay? And the technology is a people process technology, okay? You've got to think about the CHRO and how we look after the employees, encourage them without disenfranchising them, etc. But specifically around the technology, we're in an extraordinarily privileged place in that we do policy management around DORA and NIS2. We're well known for that. We also have a CMDB, so we know kind of everything that's going on in most of these organizations. And managing tech is kind of something we're good at. Network systems, databases is our raison d'etre. So a language model is like a super sophisticated database. Don't tell anybody else the language model providers I said that. And agents are no more than a function. And so we kind of combine that experience into this governance technology we have. And I think it's so important because if we don't trust the technology, if you get the governance right and you've got the observability, you know what the agents are doing, you've got minimum reuse and you've got minimize agent sprawl, you've got authentication, and I know that agent is the agent it says it is. And when that agent's going to go and look in a database or a data source, you've got to trust that it's going to go into the right data source and it's actually got the authority and the permissions to go and get that data. So all of that, I think, is a super sophisticated area. And you've got to be able to demonstrate the ROI through those environments, as well as your compliance to things like the EU AI. I want to click, show me my compliance across my whole AI estate.
So that brings me to you, Guy. So you talk about agent interaction security and things like, agentic birth certificate. I mean, that seems to be exciting. So
if we leave the technology aside for a moment and look what is going to happen to our customers as they evolve, the members, okay? The Artificial Intelligence Act in the EU, AIA, has done something quite revolutionary over the last 2 years. People are not really familiar with the thing because it's usually for the lawyers, but something really happened there. Regulation compliance used to be a checklist where you were told what to check. You check the list, literally, and you do that little ticky, and you've gone. And then you get the auditors, and they check the list, and life is good.
Yeah.
And everything was good, and they all check. And then you're supposed to have access control, and you're supposed to have authentication, and you're supposed to have logs, etc. But innovation is running like crazy. And the regulator, for the first time in the history of regulation in IT, because financial services has been doing it for years, realized that they cannot keep up with this checklist creation. So instead, they moved into a risk-based approach. That's basically asking the business to declare what they're going to do, and they audit that declaration. So when members starts talking to me about what do I need to configure in my data platform or what do I need to configure in my agent platform to be compliant, I tell them it's whatever your risk appetite is.
Yeah.
And the audit is going to be whether you're doing it correctly. So we're moving into auditing a process, not auditing the config. This is a major shift and also underpins the governance to your interaction security. Agents will need to interact with each other in many ways. It's called MCP, ACP, A2A, etc., etc. Most important is the way those interactions will be described so they can be declared and then test that you have really enforced what you've committed to. That's risk-based regulation, and that's where the world is moving. So these are, in general, above the technology layer, the requirements that we all need to look towards.
Absolutely. So before we go to the rapid fire, right, one last question to you, Amit, from a consulting perspective. Do you see adoption as still a challenge, or has that bus already gone past us? Or
Oh, there's a great opportunity out there. Adoption is a challenge, but at least there is a realization people have. They need to adapt. I think I touched the sensitive subject of, if jobs are at stake or not. And, uh, what I have come to realize it, any new technology throws up new challenges. So what you need to do is, if you were doing X, you get to do Y, because you need to deal with challenges of the new technology. So I don't think the jobs are going away. It's a transition phase, and people need to learn how to work with AI. I mean, for sure, there are some which get impacted. It's a complete tedious, repetitive task in which they have been doing, and nobody enjoys that, by the way, for sure. So, but there is still a need for monitoring, verification. What if the agent goes wrong? And as you said, the roles are evolving. I mean, the whole auditability of what agent has done, explainability. Yeah. So, you want to add something, Adam?
Yeah, no, I mean, I did a podcast the other week and we ended up in a conversation around CRM. And if you think about all of your jobs that you're doing today, right, and you apply the principles of ITIL, right, which is all how you run IT, incident change and problem management, we're all fighting fires, right? And it's pretty boring putting fires out all the time. It's much more interesting thinking and solving problems and how you change business. And what this AI is going to give us, if we get it right and we lay the foundations and we do all the right things and we persist in the framework of risk, as you described very eloquently, Guy, it's going to allow us as human beings to concentrate our CPUs on problem and change management. And a lot of the fires will be put out for us so we can thrive. So there is a different dichotomy coming up. I totally agree with that, Amit.
so, Adam, maybe the last round for us for rapid fire. So I'll just start with you on that. Yeah, it's 2 years from now. We are sitting here in Wipro, MWC. How does that winning telco enterprise look like?
I think it's a very different organization structure. I think the leadership will be looking not to run the silos they run today. So it won't be running a CFO and a go-to-market and a sales team and a distribution team. They'll be running and optimize across the processes, reporting to the board. I think that has a big shift on how we set our own people up in organizations. And I think people who can pivot to be responsible for an end-to-end process will be the ones who will be defining the problem and change management of those organizations of the future as we've put the fires out in the silos. So that's how I see things being very, very different, total different organization structures.
Great perspective. Nevash, you want to add?
I would say that a telecom would not be focused just on subscribers and growth. It would be focused on data intelligence. Because data intelligence goes to the core of the telco. We've established that they have more data than any other industry that exists. There is a lot more to optimize, whether, you look at the job roles. As you said, you could do jobs just differently. There's a mindset shift. But to me, at the heart of everything is your data intelligence. We've got to be led in that direction of data to resolve the growth challenge and the efficiency problems that they face.
Sure, absolutely. Okay.
I'm going to answer it differently. We have more than 135,000 practitioners in your telcos. I would like to think that the way they do their daily job has changed. They are not going to sit there, collect requirements, write a document anymore. They're actually going to go to some industry agent or an agent of a company, describe their problem, and that will write a document for them. That's how the telco of the future, to me, look like. That the jobs have changed and the operating way we operate the business has changed.
That's an interesting perspective. So, Amit, finally, when I come to you, right, I have a different question to you. Okay. So, as consultants, we would like to delight the clients, right? What would be that aha moment? Define this aha moment for me. I remember you saying this to me.
Obviously, in the agent world, I've seen a lot of aha moments, and this has been a realization on when people get the prompt right, they get the output they desire. But in the agentic world, I haven't seen that yet. And I believe, as you said, Adam, they have to think of the organization differently, maybe go in a service way. Look at your outcomes, look at the end-to-end service, how does it perform? I mean, some of the conversations we are having with CEOs in some of the organizations, the discussion is provisioning takes X 60 days. How can we bring it to 30 days? In some others, it takes 4 hours. How can we bring it to minutes? Right? And that needs a different thinking. You need to cut the function silos, which you rightly said. For the last decade, we have been, let's say, cutting through the data silos, getting the data lakes right. And now data, you come in with the Databricks and then you say there is a need for lake house, because that's how you drive the value, not having tons of data just to do analytics out there. But the next phase is going to be breaking the function silos. And that's exactly the point where we see the organizations differently. And that should bring aha movement, is my view.
So I think love talking to all of you. A lot of creative insights, a lot of bold statements, Guy, giving prescriptive as usual. I think let's give all of them a good applause. And I think we had a great conversation over here. Thank you very much. Thank you.